On August 18, 2025, the world was brought to the edge when Russia launched a missile at what it presumed to be a Ukrainian plane, but the target was indeed an American F-35, a Lightning II stealth fighter aircraft cruising in international airspace. From Kaliningrad, a 4,000-pound S-400 missile shrieked into the heavens at Mach 14, ripping through the clouds and exploding close enough to rip the wings from the F-35 with a shockwave that compelled its pilot into a desperate sea landing. His last words, "Mayday, hit target over the Baltic Sea," crackled over secure channels and set off a tempest in Washington, where leaders interpreted the strike not as error, but as an unmistakable act of war. The USS Gerald R. Ford unleashed its wrath within hours, sending 68 suicide drones, 25 fighter jets, and 20 Tomahawk missiles in a retaliatory storm against Russia's most heavily fortified defenses. The world looked on in amazement as the skies above the Baltic exploded into confusion. Was this really a desperate mistake, or had Russia laid bare its secret agenda? And more to the point, could America's retaliation breach Moscow's apparently unbreachable armor? At 9:42 a.m. that morning, the quietness over the Baltic Sea was broken as the F-35, which had departed from the UK's RAF Salaknib on a routine surveillance mission, was targeted by Russia's advanced S-400 Triumph radar. Russian officers who were in hardened bunkers, believing they were tracking an enemy Ukrainian plane, authorized firing. The missile roared toward its target, and inside the cockpit, the 34-year-old American pilot fought for survival, yanking controls, deploying flares, and pulling bone-crushing G maneuvers for 27 harrowing seconds before the missile self-destructed just 600 yards away. The blast crippled the jet, shrapnel tearing through its wing as alarms screamed across the cockpit. Grasping to stabilize his shaking hands, the pilot called one final broadcast, calm, deliberate, and terminal. "Mayday, Mayday, Falcon 1 struck over Baltic seas, plane damaged, trying controlled ditch," before the nose of the jet pointed toward the steel-gray ocean. At 9:47 a.m., the crippled F-35 turned sharply, its torn wing flashing in the sunlight as it plunged toward the Baltic Sea. And in that moment, the boundary between warning and war was traversed. What Moscow took as a demonstration of force had, in the view of Washington, become an irrefutable demonstration of hostility. By 4:15 a.m. Washington time, the last encrypted message from the pilot, "Aircraft hit, pilot ejecting, immediate recovery needed," scrolled onto Pentagon screens, and in minutes the White House Situation Room was crowded with America's highest leaders. The President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the National Security Advisor, each glumly regarding the facts. A $98 million fighter was lost in one of the world's most perilous corridors, and intelligence verified that the missile originated from Kaliningrad, Russia's most heavily fortified military base. The margin for error was virtually zero. The implication was terrifying. Russia had shot directly at the United States. At 4:27 a.m., the president issued one order: prepare the fleet. On the other side of the Atlantic, the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group, the world's most advanced naval fleet, waited on call: one carrier, 2 missile cruisers, 3 destroyers, and over 75 planes. The strategy was rapid and merciless: overwhelm Kaliningrad defenses. First, 68 suicide drones with radar-jamming pods and precision bombs would fill the skies, followed by a spearhead of 15 F-22 Raptors and 10 F-15EX Eagles, their bays full of JDAM smart bombs and AMRAAM missiles. As the Situation Room stood in stunned silence, each man and woman knew this. The 2 biggest nuclear powers had been brought to the brink, and America was going to respond with flames. By 3:30 p.m., Baltic time, the gray clouds shook when the initial wave of retribution rose from the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, with 68 drones unmanned hovering like a metal storm across the horizon, their payloads shining in the waning sunlight. Behind them rolled the steel wall of Raptors and Eagles, engines bellowing as they sliced through the air in perfect formation, each capable of carrying enough firepower to reduce fortresses to rubble. Below on the carrier deck, sailors stood in silence, aware that the next half hour could start the world on all-out war. Within Kaliningrad's bunkers, Warning sirens howled as American drones blanketed the skies with phony signals, deluging radar screens with hundreds of ghost targets. Blinded initially, Russia's backup systems, Pantsir S-1s and Buk M3s, locked on in minutes, and the heavens were ablaze as 18 surface-to-air missiles arced into the air, disintegrating 12 drones in blazing bursts. A tumbling drone almost hit the Raptors before it was incinerated by a rapid burst from an escorting Eagle, but the swarm continued unabated. Fanning out into 3 clusters, the remaining 56 drones dived at radar sites and missile batteries, and at 3:43 p.m., the first strike landed. An S-400 battery disintegrated in a colossal fireball that engulfed fuel trucks and ammunition depots. The Raptors took advantage, swooping in twos to deliver precision-guided JDAMs that shattered bunkers asunder and destroyed radar domes, costing hundreds of millions. Russian gunners retaliated fiercely, autocannon tracers lancing through the clouds and sending several drones into the sea, only to be shut down by Eagle strikes that destroyed their batteries in turn. At 3:50 p.m., even though America had lost 17 drones, at least 7 major defense sites were left in smoking craters, Kaliningrad's once invulnerable shield bleeding. But Moscow wasn't done. At 3:51 p.m., remaining S-300 V4 and Pantsir systems launched 22 missiles in a merciless counterattack, contrails slicing the sky at scorching velocities. An F-15EX took a head-on hit and exploded in midair, its pilots being engulfed in flames before their parachutes could deploy. As a nearby Raptor limped back with smoke streaming behind it, its stealth hide ripped asunder by shrapnel. For an instant, the fight went against the Americans, overwhelming fire on the verge of reversing the advance. The Raptors used their stealth to duck out, while the heavier Eagles battled under blistering fire, straining to maintain formation. Then came America's answer. At 3:58 p.m., the USS Thomas Hudner, patrolling offshore, fired 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles that streaked across the sea at low altitude, weaving toward Russian command centers. By 4:02 p.m., the first warheads smashed into bunkers, blasting steel doors skyward and reducing fortified command posts to rubble, killing dozens of officers in seconds. The fortress that Moscow had thought impregnable now crumbled under fire, and the tempest only grew in fury. The barrage did not stop. Missile after missile pounded hardened targets, destroying a $250 million radar dome and setting an ammunition depot ablaze that burned in a series of explosions so intense they shook windows 10 miles away. 300 feet high flames shooting into the air as black smoke curled toward the skies. By 4:07 p.m., Kaliningrad's defiant command structure lay in shambles. Almost half of its top officers were dead or missing. Communications had disintegrated into crackle, and what was once Russia's strongest fortress was falling apart before global eyes. Victory came at a price. 2 of America's newest aviators and their pilots were lost, a price that hung heavily on board the USS Gerald R. Ford, even as the fire of retribution engulfed Kaliningrad. By 4:30 in the afternoon, satellite photos confirmed the unimaginable. More than 70% of the exclave's air defenses destroyed in fewer than 47 minutes. A decade's worth of ammunition depots reduced to rubble, and some $6.4 billion in fortifications and assets erased from the face of the earth. Later it was learned that 47 Russian officers were slain, including 3 generals and 9 colonels, along with over 420 soldiers killed or injured. Convoys of remnant troops and civilians retreated inland as radio talk full of panic. The fortress Moscow, once referred to as invincible, remained silent. From the deck of the Gerald R. Ford, sailors gazed toward the massive plumes of smoke, aware their dead comrades' absence eclipsed every victory. But their sacrifice meant something, evidence that America's metal is not just melted in steel and flames, but in the lives of the men who guard its emblem. Kaliningrad had been thought invulnerable. Now it smoldered, a threat to allies and a warning to enemies etched in wreckage. Attack one of America's planes, and the answer would not be in a message, but in destruction.